How high can BNB go in 2025? Now, there are some wild predictions out there, and just to kind of how bullish we might actually find BNB in 2025. In today's video, I'm going to be breaking down where I think that price action is heading and how high I think BNB could go next year. Now, as I get into today's video, if you do find it useful and informative, smash that like button. If you're new to the channel, subscribe, and let's take a look at our price prediction for BNB. Okay, so here we have BNB paired up with USDT on the 1-day Binance chart. Now, very interesting kind of structures. There's a lot of data here to kind of digest, right? We have everything from the very early days of basically 2017 into that kind of bull market peak, the kind of moves down into December 2018, the initial rally of 2019 going up into a new all-time high, as you can kind of see, the correction into the pandemic, the fantastic 2021 bull market highs, the bear market lows of 2022, and where we sit today, which was a new all-time high basically back in June, we can see some pretty interesting kind of stuff. Now, in order for us to truly understand the potential here, we need to first of all figure out historically what's occurred, how low we think the price action could go for the next run to the upside, and how high that run could potentially go. So there's a few things we need to address. So we're going to start things off by taking a look at the 2017 kind of runs, which actually we don't really see. We can actually see that December 2017 was the low point. We actually had the all-time high in January of 2018. Okay, so very interesting kind of structure. Now, I don't care terribly too much about the early days for BNB's price action, because what I do think is going on, and I've kind of addressed this in other videos, is that we are kind of mimicking what happened back in 2019. So from our kind of lows of 2022 into kind of 2023, it does to me look like we have a very similar kind of initial setup. Sorry. And that initial setup is basically this automatic rally from the bear market low points. Now, in BNB's case, we don't see the direct impact on that within the kind of 2022 into basically going into 2023. Instead, 2023 was a bit of a lackluster year for BNB for some of the obvious reasons around, CZ and legal cases and stuff. But 2024 started off very, very well in a very similar kind of ilk to what we saw back here in the 2019 era. So we have a pretty interesting kind of structure going on. Now, when it comes to the price action here, it's quite an interesting pattern that has emerged. So if we take into consideration everything that's kind of gone on for BNB, there's a couple of different ways that we could potentially look at the market. And we wanted to kind of take a look at some of the potential moves for BNB. Of what I did unfold as to kind of where things are, right? We can see here that this rally from the real low areas of 2017 into that initial peak with a correction down into 2018, and then everything that happened through 2019, 2020, and 2021, it actually went up higher than the 1.236. Now, this means that we are following a very interesting structure, okay? The structure being not necessarily an impulsive one, but maybe more of a W, X, Y, X, and Z pattern. Okay, so we want to kind of keep that in the back of our minds. It means that there's going to still be some pretty interesting gains to be made, but not necessarily 100% perfect in terms of the internal structures and workings of that. The other one that I guess some people are kind of speculating on is that you have some kind of 5-wave move in there. And I agree that that's actually probably a really nice fit for everything that we have seen in terms of 2019 into the 2021 highs. Okay, and if that is the case, then you've kind of got to take into consideration that WXYXZ and Z pattern, because you'd have your kind of 5 waves over here. We don't hit 1.618, so there's no 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 kind of situation going on. That doesn't exist. But you would potentially look at this through the idea that maybe you have some kind of ABC structure here and a big reset. Okay, and if you do have that reset going on here, then actually that puts us in a really interesting position going into 2025. I'm going to try to be as conservative as I can on this. There's a lot of detail to kind of think about in terms of what historically happened. And if we are in some kind of big reset here, then we need to kind of consider that there's a some interesting possible scenarios that unfold. But I'm going to try to keep this as real as I can and focus in on the structures that have started to appear on the premise that 2021 was kind of a completing structure. It finished, and now we kind of see these corrections. So we already know that there's the correction to the downside, and that was complete back in basically the lows of June 2022. Which was an interesting time period for many in the space. Okay, so we have our kind of bear market low point for BNB coming in at $183.40. Okay, and so if that's the low point, our bullish market really started back here in mid 2022. Now, what's interesting about that is the interesting kind of structures that appear internally here with a three-wave corrective pattern to the upside. It's a three-wave corrective pattern in my opinion, but there are the potential scenarios where this is actually an impulsive expanding diagonal pattern. I don't think that's the case. It could also potentially be some form of diagonal that would also fit this reasonably well. But you know, I don't want to kind of label this up as an impulsive structure. I don't think that's the right thing to do. Instead, to me, it looks like we actually have a very corrective pattern here. This was then followed by another corrective pattern to the downside coming into here, okay, not lower than the previous low. So there's a couple of different ways that we can kind of take a look at that. We can kind of think maybe there's a corrective pattern overall and we kind of completed it. Okay, or we just have two corrective patterns here, and actually this is the reversal that we're looking for. Okay, indicating that there was some volatility here, but it wasn't really the start of a bullish time. And you can also kind of note that we were dancing around the 200 EMA and we didn't really get any major traction with it. Now, from our lows over here, which basically was October 2023, this is when many altcoins actually did bottom out. So we can see a new push to the downside at $202 back then. And some very interesting, more impulsive based structures started to appear as we started to see runs up to June 2024. Okay, so up here in June 2024, we see $721. So to me, it looks like this is really the impulsion that we've been kind of wanting to see and kind of where we want things to start tracking from, in my opinion. Now, is it possible that there's some kind of diagonal based pattern going on here? It's possible, but very unlikely based on the nature of the impulsive nature that we see on this move to the upside from the lows of October 2023 to June 2024. They are more impulsive, not so much overlapping in the same way that we saw with these corrections during the bear market and obviously trying to bottom out in October 2023. So I think actually taking a look at our structures, we are in a very good point to think, okay, whether actually this to me looks more likely to be where we find our structures actually starting to make a lot more sense. So we can see here the idea of a diagonal based pattern just forming in here with a bit of a running flat also occurring inside there as well. So to me, that looks like we finished off a fifth wave move to the high point. And if we take that into consideration to all of this that is going on, where we can see here that it's wave 1, wave 2. I would argue that here is your wave 3, and then you go into a wave 4 and 5 up here. So to me, it looks like you have something like this that has occurred for BNB. And that's the reversal pattern that I wanted to see really from the June 22 lows. But we didn't. Okay, now this is actually a really good, strong place to be for BNB, which means everything that's going on over this side is all corrective. And I do expect still to see some more volatility to the downside. I don't think we're necessarily done with this correction just yet. Even though we have some higher high stuff going on here, I do look at this through the lens that maybe there's still another pull to the downside to be had. I could be wrong because there is still the potential here that this is going to be a diagonal that leads us into the next big move. And it doesn't rule out the bigger kind of wave 2 corrections that typically do pull back quite aggressively. Okay, so we can see that there's the idea that maybe there's a three-wave completed pattern down here that's already kind of truncated, indicating that our low for this next run to the upside came in at $400 flat. But there's also a possible scenario unfolding where actually all we're doing at the moment is resetting for a bigger kind of collapse in the market. So we have three waves coming up, and then potentially we come back down in a more lower three waves and lose that $400, right? That's still up in the air, and that's a bit of a problem for us trying to predict out where things could potentially go. But for the purpose of today's video, I'm going to use the $400 low as our anchor point. on the assumption that actually there's a huge buyer order block here. Okay, you can see the wicks coming in, and really this is held up incredibly well. So to me, this looks like an area that's more than likely going to hold, indicating that $400 is probably going to be a nice strong low point for BNB. So I'm going to go ahead and just pull that yellow box area in there so you can kind of see that basically between $400 and $486, it seems to be a very reasonable area for BNB to find good support. So for our expectations on the market, we then need to measure where we think that price action could be going, right? Now, if we take into consideration that 5-wave move to the upside and we push this over to the $400 level, that's going to give us our projections on the market for BNB. Now, there's a few interesting things here, but for the most part, I'm just going to go straight in giving you the ideas as to kind of where we would typically expect the price to go. And that's kind of a bullish kind of target, but it's going to be basically $1,418 to $1,911, which seems a little bit aggressive, but actually from a percentage point of view, it's not that bad. If you take it from the $400 low point, we could potentially be looking at around 252 to about 374. Not huge percentage movements, of course. From the current price at the point of recording today's video, well, that's even less. It's about 133%. But from our actual low point of October, if you were accumulating back then at around that $201, then actually that's going to be around 600% upwards towards that kind of range of 847%. So those kind of numbers, they're not actually completely unreasonable. They're numbers that actually do fit into the idea that you have this kind of finishing 5-wave structure, which would be a kind of 3-wave pattern that is corrective, which ties into all of the corrective patterns that we had seen before as well. So for BNB, I think that's a reasonable expectation. Of course, there's going to be some interesting areas on the journey. So obviously $1,400 to 2K essentially is going to be, some pretty nice juicy numbers. It's going to get a lot of people's brains melting when they start thinking about market cap. I do think though there's actually some more interesting areas that for the conservative people out there between kind of $874 and $1,000. These are the 618 and the 786 fib levels that are going to basically be areas that are going to resonate with people and potentially going to create a little bit of sell pressure. So I think these are the areas to kind of be thinking about. Personally, 800 to 1,000, 1,400 to 1,900. These are the areas that I think we could potentially see BNB go to in 2025. Of course, these are just my thoughts and opinions on the data in the charts as I see it. What do you think? Let me know in the comments down below, or join us in our free Discord server. We would love to hear from you. And guys, if you haven't done so already, check out this video right here. It's not one you're going to want to miss.